Okay. So I just wanted to say a few general remarks about a practice of meditation, and then open it up to whatever's on your mind about anything that has come up so far, or anything else that you'd like to ask about. I think briefly the other day we made mention of the fact that there are many, many, many different meditation practices, but generally speaking, they all fall into two divisions. And one of the division is the practice to cultivate a unwavering attention. It's kind of a bit cultivating our concentration so that whatever it is that we focus on, we can penetrate. And for generating that is largely a matter of overcoming the tendency of the mind to wander, to be distracted. Another way of putting it is that our attention is often like a regular incandescent light that shines with a very diffuse light, and we want to transform it into a laser that can actually penetrate. Okay, so there are many meditation techniques to develop this kind of stability of mind, this strong concentration. And then there are meditations that are often called analytic, or meditations in which we examine something to gain some insight into it. So this second is often called insight meditation. So there's stabilizing meditation to stabilize the mind, and then insight meditation to gain understanding. Okay? So those are two just very general categories. So I want to offer a couple of examples of the combination of both of those in different ways. Let's say there's a topic that we hear about, or that we're studying in the Dharma, that we want to gain deeper understanding and realizations about. For example, one of the fundamental teachings of Buddhism refers to impermanence, or change. That even though things can appear to be solid and unchanging, in fact, everything that we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch is changing every moment. So it's not enough just to gain an intellectual understanding of that. The intellectual understanding is not that difficult, but to really feel it in the depths of our heart, that's more difficult. Because we have this natural tendency to view things, either inanimate objects or even other people, even ourselves, as if we had some kind of solid, concrete, unchanging nature. And according to Buddha, this is one of the fundamental misconceptions, or one of the fundamental forms of ignorance that is responsible for suffering. So, if we're going to get out of suffering, we have to cultivate the wisdom that sees, among other things, the fact that all these phenomena are impermanent, meaning they're always changing. So, in order to develop that insight, we do need a very strong, stable mind. You know, thinking about it every once in a while with just part of our attention isn't going to bring about a transformation. We have to have that kind of a strong focus. So there are meditations in which we engage in that help gradually build up that stability. So the one that's been presented already here, very briefly, is the breath awareness meditation. Okay? Remember, after doing the cleansing breath, we just let the breath come and go as it will, right? As if we were asleep. Because when we're asleep, the breath comes and goes of its own accord. But the difference is we let that happen while we're fully awake. Now, what our experience is that after a few moments of observing the breath, what happens?
The mind moves.
The mind goes somewhere else, right? A sound, a thought, a judgment, a worry, an anticipation, any of a number of million things come up. And as I mentioned the other day, all of them are more interesting than the breath, right? So naturally our mind runs to them because it's more interesting, right? But that just further ingrains the habit of mental wandering, of scattering, of having a diffuse mind rather than a focused mind. So in this practice, which is a very simple, basic practice, we give ourselves a task, observe the incoming and outgoing breath. We give it that task, and then we engage in it, we observe the breath, and then with a corner of our mind, we observe, am I still on the object or not? Has my attention wandered or not? That second quality is sometimes called introspection. So with introspection, we become more and more aware of whether our mind is focused the way we intended it to be focused. And when we notice that the mind has drifted away, then we let go of whatever object it drifted towards, whatever thought or sensation or judgment, whatever it was, and then bring it back to the original object, which in this case was the breath. It doesn't have to be the breath, by the way. There are other objects we can use, but in the beginning the breath is recommended. Okay? So after a while, in a very slow, gradual process, what happens is the tendency for the mind to drift gets weaker. Right? It doesn't get eliminated until quite high stages on the spiritual path, but at least it can get weaker, right? And the tendency of the mind to stay put becomes stronger. Right? And there's an analogy that we can think of an adult taking care of a young child, like a parent having a conversation with another adult, and at their side is their little toddler, right? So most of the attention is on having the conversation, but with the corner of their eye, the parent is keeping watch on whether the child is still there or not, so it doesn't wander off into the street or get into some kind of trouble. And of course, because the parent is really concerned about the welfare of the child, he or she pays attention in such a way that as soon as she becomes aware that the child has drifted away, bring it back, right? And to do it patiently, even if you have to do it again and again. It doesn't do any good to yank the child back. You just dislocate their arm, but you lead the child back, right? So this is like placing the attention back. Now what happens after a while? After a while, I'm describing an ideal circumstance. As a parent, I know it doesn't always work this way, but in an ideal sense, what happens is, after a while, you don't actually have to go out and bring the child back. After a while, it's just enough to glance at the child, and they'll stay put. Right? Have you ever had that experience? It's magic when that happens, because it doesn't always happen. But in some cases it does, right? There's a certain stage of training where you actually have to go and retrieve the child. There's another state in which just showing interest, letting the child know that you're paying attention to it, keeps the child in place, right? Ideally, okay? So in a similar fashion, in the beginning, there's a tremendous power of the wandering mind. And it's harder and harder to even observe that it's wandering, and when you observe it, it's hard to bring it back. But as we do this process over and over again, patiently bringing the mind back when it's wandering, and do the practice in a reasonable way, like for brief periods of time, but repeatedly, then the tendency of the mind to wander gets less, and then something quite wonderful can happen, and that is we become aware that the mind is about to wander before it's wandered. Right? So instead of having to go out and bring the child back, you intercept. You're so sensitive. You know the child is starting to get restless, so just a little glance or a little word can keep the child present within certain boundaries, of course. So we develop this ability to recognize a certain state of restlessness and deal with it before we have to bring the mind back. So this is a very, very brief overview of how this ability to focus the mind, to get mental stability and clarity, can be cultivated bit by bit. Right? There are very extensive teachings on how to develop this in a very strong way. If you're interested in that, these teachings, the area that it's known in Sanskrit is shamatha, S-H-A-M-A-T-A, shamatha meditation. So there's a lot of descriptions on how to cultivate shamatha meditation. And one of the best and most accessible descriptions of it is in a wonderful book by His Holiness the Dalai Lama called How to See Yourself as You Really Are. How to See Yourself as You Really Are. There's 2 chapters towards the end of that book. I think it was something like chapters 21 and 22, but I'm not sure, which are devoted to developing this shamatha method. The rest of the book is to develop wisdom, its ability to analyze. Okay, so with the mind stilled and focused, then we engage in the insight meditation. Because it's really impossible to develop real insight if the mind is always flickering, right? So this insight or examination meditation takes place. So I wanted to give 2 examples of that, and then I'll turn this over to you. Okay? In one type of meditation, we're trying to gain an understanding about a topic, right? So understanding impermanence is an example of that. Right? That you're focusing on the reality of impermanence so that you gain a deep understanding of it, and that affects the way you view reality. So during examination meditation, you'll do such things as read a text about impermanence and so forth, and then start checking your experience. Like, is there anything in your life that has remained solid over time and unchanging? And you can do things like going through a picture album, and there's pictures of you or one of your relatives from the time that they were a baby until whatever age they are now. And you can see from the evidence of this that even though you might not notice the change day by day, if you spread it out like that, it's constant change. The baby is slowly growing up and becoming an adult like that. So that's one example from your own experience, and then you can focus on that until you develop more and more appreciation. Or you can take things that seem to be so solid and concrete, like a building, which is often made out of concrete or stone, right? And it looks unchanging from day to day. And then think that when you visited places like the pyramids in England, in Egypt, or some other old building in the world that once used to be as new and solid looking as this, now they're ruins. They've crumbled into dust. So from day to day, moment to moment, year to year, they didn't seem to be changing, but clearly they were. Otherwise, why are they ruins now? It wasn't that someone necessarily destroyed them, they're in a process of change. Or maybe you've studied something about physics and you realize that all matter is made up of subatomic particles, and these subatomic particles aren't staying the same from even 1 second to the next. So even when it's not obvious impermanence, subtle impermanence is happening all the time. So in all of these ways, you acquaint your mind with the reality of impermanence. And also, while you're doing that, you can also have a debate with yourself. Because maybe you say, no, maybe there is something that doesn't change over time. So you debate, you try to examine it more and more deeply. And it's important, of course, to understand the exact wording of the teachings, because it doesn't say that everything undergoes change from moment to moment. It says all the objects of your seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Right? So there could be some things that you think about, some abstract idea. Maybe that doesn't change, but all the things that make up your experience with the world, that's what changes. Okay? So eventually, by exploring this more and more deeply, using more and more examples, right, like that, you begin to start to get not just an intellectual understanding of change, but you realize how pervasive it is. This realization, or this level of understanding, can be very weak in the beginning, it can be very mild, and it requires kind of repeated examination for it to get stronger. But it is some kind of understanding. Somehow our mind is getting familiar with something that it wasn't familiar with before. The extent of change, the extent of impermanence. Okay? When that happens, when you reach what Lama Yeshe used to call the conclusion of your meditation, not the end, but the understanding that you're aiming for, this understanding of impermanence, an understanding that was stronger than whatever you started with. Then what you do is you stop the examination meditation. And instead, you take that conclusion, you take that understanding, and you focus your attention on it single-pointedly. It's like the part of the breath awareness meditation that you're just simply focusing on the incoming and outgoing breath. So you focus your mind on whatever conclusion you've come. It might be an emotional appreciation. It might be an intellectual understanding, but it's something that wasn't there before. And at that point, you cease examining it and just focus your mind single-pointedly on it. Now, after a while, it may happen that you lose that focus, right? Then what you have to do is you have to go back to examination meditation and build up the recognition of impermanence once again until the awareness gets strong, and then focus your mind single-pointedly on it. And this process of mixing single-pointed concentration and examination in this way, this process is a little bit like preparing food. And you have some food and you want to give it a really nice flavor, so you prepare a sauce or a marinade, something that has a really nice flavor, and you take the food and you place it in that sauce, in that marinade, so it kind of soaks up its juices, soaks up its taste. Well, this is similar. You prepare an understanding through examination meditation, and then you place your mind single-pointedly into that understanding, so it soaks it up, it becomes part of its taste, part of its understanding, like that. So that's one way in which you can think of single-pointed concentration meditation and examination meditation working together. But not all meditations are a matter of the mind gaining an understanding of something. Sometimes the meditation is the mind developing a quality. Right? So for example, there's meditations on love. Right? So love in this context is defined as the wish for others to be happy. And compassion is the wish for others to be free from their suffering. Okay? Well, the examination meditation on it, there can be some important aspects, but just understanding what love means is not the essence. I mean, you want to learn the definition so that you're cultivating the right thought, but that's not that difficult. What's more difficult is to generate love or compassion for people that you don't feel love and compassion for. So in this case, love or compassion isn't the object of meditation that you're trying to understand, it's the object of meditation that you're trying to develop. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So here, this kind of meditation, you're trying to generate something as part of your mind that may not have been there before, or may have only been there in a weak state and not a powerful state. As I mentioned before, we all know what compassion is, right? So it's not as if we have to develop compassion from zero. We already have some, right? But we don't necessarily have it for everyone. And when we don't have it for everyone, it means our mind, instead of being radiant in 360 degrees, is somehow or other contracted. And that's exactly the opposite of the enlightened state of mind. The enlightened state of mind in which everything is radiant, everything is open. And of course that's not only beneficial for others, but that's an aspect of fulfilling our enlightened potential. Okay? So in order to do that, it's important to expand the scope of our love and compassion. And those are just two of the qualities that we could mention, but they're two of the most obvious ones. Okay? So how do we go about expanding our love or compassion? Well, it's a process that takes place over a period of time. Right? And you may start by bringing to mind someone that you already naturally feel love for. You know, someone who's near and dear to you. Whenever you think of them, you feel kind of brighter, more radiant. And if you ever imagine that this person needs something or wants something, you automatically feel how wonderful it would be for them to have it. So the wish for this person to be happy arises spontaneously. So you spend some time bringing that to mind so you really know what that's like. Okay. Then you might bring to mind someone for whom that same emotion is not arising so easily. You might bring to mind someone who's quite a stranger to you. Or if you're really brave in your meditation, you might actually bring to mind someone who you actively dislike. Someone for whom it's not natural to feel this love or this compassion. Okay. So you bring to mind this person, and this can be done in a number of ways, but you can have the person you already feel love to visualize here, and then this other person that you're working on next to them, and you just regard your mind of how it's different. You know, how it feels different when you regard one and when you regard the other. Right? And then you ask yourself, why? Why is it that I effortlessly feel love and compassion for this person, but when I think of this other person, yuck. You know, it's anything but love or compassion, right? It might be bitterness, resentfulness, distance, alienation, whatever the feeling might be. So you actually notice that your heart is operating differently in regard to those two. And you try to understand what is the core reason for that? Is it just a habit? Or is it based on some kind of history that you have with that person? And sometimes it is based on a history. Like you remember, when you think of the person you love, you think of all the affection you've shared and all the nice feelings. But when you think of the other person, you just remember the insults. You remember the problems you've had. You remember the difficulties this person has caused. And so you realize, well, I naturally feel love for this person, and I naturally don't feel it for that person for these reasons. Then you have to start examining, are those valid reasons? Are they good enough reasons? And so you have to bring in the rest of the teachings to be able to examine that. Right? So just to give one example, you might think a person who has been kind to me deserves to be happy, whereas a person who has been mean to me doesn't deserve to be happy. So therefore I feel love for one, and I don't feel love for the other. And that's the conclusion a lot of people come to. Right? Is that valid? Does that make sense? That person that you don't feel affectionate for, that you have a problem with, does everyone who deals with that person feel the same way? Or might that person who's your enemy be the best friend of somebody else? Right? So why is your judgment of that person as being negative more correct than the other person's judgment of that person being lovable? Right? Why are we holding on to our view as the only right view? It's only, in a sense, an accident of history. Maybe accident's not such a good word. A result of our own personal history. We're remembering this where the other person is remembering that. And then we can think of other examples, like many people when they were kids have a favorite aunt or uncle. They love it when this older relative visits. That gives them presents and they play with them and they're always really nice. So the child has this real memory of this aunt or uncle as being lovable. Then later on in life, when we've both gotten a lot older, we start dreading the visit of this same aunt or uncle because they're always criticizing us. They're not treating us like the lovable little baby we once were. Now they're saying, oh, why did you marry so-and-so? Why did you do this? Why didn't you do that? Why didn't you follow my advice? Why this? Why that? And they become critics. And now that same person that we used to think of with so much affection, we prefer not to see them very often. Right? So all of these examples show us that we can have very, very strong attitudes of either liking or disliking that are changeable. As our mind changes, as our experience changes, we can generate very strong feelings of either aversion or hatred or liking or disliking. But at the time, those emotional reactions seem so solid and so real, but they're all based on circumstance. And the circumstances are constantly changing. So the fact that we feel really close to one person at the moment doesn't mean that's the only way we could ever feel about him or her. Or the fact that we feel strong aversion doesn't mean that's the only way we could possibly feel. Especially when we realize that there's other people who regard that same person in a very different way than we do. So what happens is the very solid view that we have, let's say the solid view of disliking the person, thinking he or she doesn't deserve happiness, which is the automatic feeling that comes up when we think of someone we really don't like, that they don't deserve happiness. That solid feeling, we realize, isn't actually that solid. we're not taking everything into account. We're just locking ourselves in to a certain habit that's been produced, just a certain perspective, thinking the way I'm viewing things now is the only way I could ever view it. Impossible to develop love for this person. This person's a terrible person, right? So we start examining that. And at some point, if our examination goes well, and we use enough examples and enough lines of reasoning and experience, what happens is that the dislike we've had for that person gets somewhat diminished. Maybe we still feel we don't really like the person that much, but now our attitude's a little bit softer. We realize, oh, there's a place that at least somebody else could like him. Maybe I still don't like him, but maybe there's something else. Right? And so the strong dislike gets weaker. And then the love, the wishing for them to be happy, which is very weak in the beginning, starts to become a little bit stronger. So we take that change as being the conclusion. What we focus the mind on, what we marinate the mind in, is just this increased feeling of closeness or affection. And then, depending on our time and our energy and so forth, each time we do the meditation, we can expand our scope of interest and concern and love for this person until eventually, when we see this person, the first thing that comes to my mind is not how much we dislike them. The first thing that comes to our mind is how much this person, like everybody else, wants to be happy. Because that's the reality that we often forget. We know that there's our young child and our puppy and our kitten and our loved ones. We know they want to be happy. But when we see someone we dislike, it's as if we completely forget that. We put them in a separate category. They not only don't deserve to be happy because they've been so bad to me, but they don't even want to be happy, right? Which is ignorant. It's just mistaken, but that's how it appears. Now, doing this meditation, getting more and more, examining it more and more closely, it's harder to hold on to such a narrow view. Something opens up in the mind. And then it's possible to develop, love even for someone that you don't even like very much, because what love is, really, is the wish for them to be happy. So let's say there is someone, the reason you don't like them is because they're so cruel and they're so evil. Right? Okay. None of us like that kind of behavior. But think of how it harms the person himself. That cruelty only affects others when he's with others. When he's by himself, that cruelty is just affecting him. It's a poisonous state of mind to have. So you can develop the wish that that person had happiness, because if he had happiness, he wouldn't be acting so cruelly. So in this way, it's possible to transform an aspect of our heart or our mind. And once that happens, once that starts to happen, then we don't have to examine anymore. We just have to experience it. Just allow our mind to soak up the juices of that experience. It's important to be intelligent about it as well. Some people feel that if I were to develop love and compassion for evil people, that would be the same as saying it's okay for you to do evil. That's not what this meditation is about. Not at all. That's just a misunderstanding. Our examination hasn't gone very far. Right? We can still wish someone to be happy and work against whatever evil they're creating. But now we're working against their evil not with hatred, but with compassion. Because we realize the evil that they're creating is not only affecting others, it's affecting them as well. So like the Dalai Lama says, a true bodhisattva confronts evil, opposes it to whatever extent he or she can, but not with hatred. Like that. So in this way, the mind can be progressively transformed. So in summary, there's two phases of meditation. One mainly has to do with developing mental stability, and the other mainly has to do with sharpening the wisdom, the ability to investigate. And then those two can be combined in the meditations in which we gain a realization of something or an understanding of something, such as impermanence or emptiness or anything like that. Or it can be a meditation in which we actually cultivate a mental quality or strengthen a mental quality. And we can do both of them by alternating stabilizing meditation and examination meditation, like that. Okay. So, just an overview. And one of the reasons it's important to keep things like that in mind is that a lot of people have an idea that what meditation is blank-mindedness. Mm-hmm. And you can see from this, it's not really blank-mindedness. You know, it's clarifying the mind. And on top of it, what we can understand is, you know, a lot of us are really, we might be drawn to blank-mindedness because we're so fed up with the garbage which is always coming up in our mind. You know, we kind of wish, oh, I wish I could just stop thinking. You know, we just have these train of thoughts coming up again and again and again. I'm so bored with it. Right? And we think, what a relief if I just didn't think anymore. So a lot of people engage in meditation hoping that they can just stop thinking like that. That's a little bit like trying to keep a pot of water from boiling by pressing the lid tightly on the top. And what happens? Eventually it explodes. There's a much better way of dealing with these rampant thoughts, and that is to choose an object that we focus on strongly enough so that all of these other thoughts recede in the background. We're not suppressing them, you know, we're not pushing down on them, but instead we're focusing on something beneficial or single-pointedly, and then what happens is that all of this noise, well before it comes to an end, recedes, you know, goes into the background and then ceases to disturb us. And then we have much more control of what we want to use our mind, what we want to use our attention for, like that. Now there can be much higher states of meditative realization in which we can actually cut the flow of thoughts. But that's a very, very high accomplishment. Well before that, there's ways of cultivating the mind so this constant chain of thoughts doesn't have its disturbing quality anymore. It doesn't disturb the basic tranquility or clarity of the mind. That is a much more realistic goal of practice. Okay, I think that's more than enough for me. So we still have a little time left. If there's anything you'd like to bring up, some questions about any of the topics or any of the practices.
We need a long time with you, Jon. That's what we need. Yeah, that's true. There's so much to discuss, I think. So.
I have a question.
Please, thank you.
I understand that when people hurt others, like for instance, and I'll give you an example. I've had a terrible breakup with my husband of 22 years, and I know the practices, I've been practicing for a long time. However, when it's really real, it's easier to say, okay, well, if that person does this, you can do that. But when it's really in you, for me, I found it this past year very difficult to find a center of not being reactive. And I'm still
Yes.
working on
Yeah.
the reactivity and not wishing to strike back, because that's sort of like a, for me, in my experience, it's like a normal state where you just, I want to defend myself.
Right.
And then all these horrible, violent things come up, and so I have to fight that. And I wanted to know if there's a particular shortcut, because sometimes it's just very difficult. It's extremely violent what goes on in my mind. To try to find forgiveness, yes, I can go there, but the real truth is that I'm in the middle of the hurricane.
Yeah.
And either because of my husband did that, or because somebody on the road did some other inappropriate thing, and I just find it difficult not to be reactive. And I've been doing yoga and practices for over 25 years, and so I have a little bit of mileage, a little bit of experience how not to go crazy. But this past year of this lesson of my marriage being, my family, my everything, just completely broken. Somebody took it and just broke it. How to deal with that? It's my question. I do the practices of light, letting go, putting him in a bubble with the green Tara, with the white Tara. I bring the green Tara, I bring everything I can, but I still, there are times where I just want to strike and just go crazy. And then I say, okay, that revenge is not good, I have to calm down. And I follow the teachings of Thich Nhat Hanh and not focusing on revenge and all that. But I still find myself involved in that hurricane of crazy. And I wanted to know if you know a shortcut, because those passions are so strong that even me, that I'm like the most non-violent person, I just think of a million ways how to go poof. So I've been dealing with that lately, and I wish to not fight it, but I know it's also a reality that is in me. And I wanted to diminish it a little bit, at least a tiny bit.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that description, because that's very evocative of the state of mind, where something is so painful that it puts us into a hurricane, where any sense of stability or clarity, even if intellectually we have some tools, we can't use it because the wind is just too violent. It sometimes is even described in those terms as the uncontrollable wind of the hallucinating mind. It's just like that, just like the hurricane you described. And one of the things which is difficult is to recognize that a lot went into creating this hurricane. And there's no shortcut to get out of the hurricane. When that turbulence is there, there's a certain, I'm not sure this is a good expression, there's almost a certain lifespan to it. We can't artificially shorten it, because just by telling the winds to stop blowing, right? That's just not realistic. So part of it is just an acceptance. This hurts, and it's probably going to hurt for quite a while. It's not despair, it's not giving up, but just being realistic that this is a strong force, and strong forces don't get dissipated instantly. That's not the way it works in nature or in our mind. So a certain acceptance of the fact that it is painful and probably will remain to be painful for a while, is a bit more realistic than searching for some kind of magic cure that's going to suddenly make everything better. You know, even if that magic cure looks like it's a Dharma technique, like a bubble with tar in it and things like that. Sounds good, but when we're under the throes of that strong emotion, it doesn't really work. It's very hard to get into that space. Now, having said that, there are things that we can do. There's a range of things we can do, but I think, and I know my teachers all think this way as well, that of all of the techniques that we can use to overcome difficult situations like that, the one that's called Jon Landaw, or taking and receiving, is the most powerful. There's a lot of different ways of practicing Jon Landaw, is taking, giving and receiving, sorry. There's a lot of different ways of practicing it, but here's one that might be particularly applicable. Whenever we have a really difficult problem, it seems to be inherently my problem. In other words, the universe at that moment shrinks into me, right? So my problem becomes the only thing of significance. It's the pain that I'm experiencing. It's almost with the feeling like nobody else could possibly feel this badly, because it's really destroying my life. You know, even if we don't say those words, it can feel that way. So whenever we do feel really strongly that way, and it could be a physical pain that we're having, or a mental or emotional pain, whenever our mind constellates around it, grabs around it like that, it's very helpful to remind ourselves that at this very moment, around the world, there must be untold hundreds, thousands, maybe even millions of people experiencing that same kind of thing. Heartbreak, disappointment, betrayal, whatever it is, whatever the problem has been for us, there's a lot of other people who are experiencing the same thing. And among all of these thousands of people having that pain, just as strong as my pain, very few, if any of them, have ways of dealing with it. Good ways of dealing with it. Their ways of dealing with it are revenge, hatred, getting drunk, you know, whatever it is. When you look at the world of how people deal with their difficulties, the techniques that are applied are, they're either useless or they make the situation worse for them. Then we can start to think, and this is available to us not necessarily right at the beginning of our spiritual practice, but once we've opened ourselves up to such things as the teachings on bodhicitta, that the motivation for our actions is really the most important determining factor of whether those actions are going to be effective or not. Once we start opening ourselves up to that idea, we can at least say to ourselves, well, I've heard about bodhicitta. I've heard about the whole process of exchanging my limited view for a universal concern for the welfare of others. So what's my situation right at the moment? My situation right at the moment is that I'm in deep pain. It really hurts. Physical, mental, emotional, breakup, betrayal, whatever the pain is. I'm in really deep pain at the moment. How wonderful it would be if my experience of it could exhaust it for all of the other people who are having the same kind of intense pain and have no way of dealing with it other than in ways that it just makes the situation worse. So it's not as if we're asking to have more pain. We're just recognizing how much pain we're in and the fact that we're not alone in it and that we have other ways of looking at it. It might not be available to us immediately, but there is another way of dealing with that situation other than the destructive way that the world in general follows. So with that thought in mind, we can think, may my experience of this pain exhaust it for everyone else who's experiencing the same or similar pain. And we can even combine that wish with a very creative visualization process. So we can think of other beings who are having problems. Maybe instead of thinking of tens or hundreds or thousands, we can just think of one person, one other person who's experiencing that same problem of betrayal or hatred or whatever it is. And then visualize that person as a pure sphere of light covered by a very dark blanket of pain. Right? That sphere is their fundamental nature. What's covering them is the circumstances of their pain. We're already experiencing pain in our heart because we're admitting to it. We're recognizing it. We're not trying to hide from it or cover it over or pretend it's not there or apply some kind of Mickey Mouse antidote to it. We're fully accepting this hurts. This really, really hurts. So now we have someone in front of us who's fundamentally pure, but is experiencing this hurricane of pain. And we have ourself, who's also fundamentally pure, but experiencing this hurricane of pain. And we draw forth the pain of the others to combat our own pain. It's like we're using fire to fight fire. Right? So the covering of the other person's pain is like a destructive energy pouring down on them. I'm already experiencing pain, so why don't I just take that into what I'm experiencing and exhaust it for the others? So we take that strength of their suffering and just pour it right on the head of our own suffering, because we're already experiencing it anyway. It's not a matter of adding to it. We're already miserable, right? So we just use that miserable experience with this motivation of compassion, this motivation of taking it away from others. If we can think of someone who's actually experiencing the same kind of pain, that's good. But if not, we know that there's other people. Just read the newspapers. Whatever problem we have, there's other people there who are experiencing the same kind of thing, whether we know them personally or not. So we think of drawing forth the destructive energy away from them and placing it on the head of our own experience. And it has the effect of loosening the knot around our own heart. It doesn't make it disappear all at once, but at least it gives a feeling that this pain that I'm experiencing has a purpose, a meaning. It's worthwhile somehow because it's exhausting it for others. And so something starts to open up. A knot starts to open up in our own heart as we're reducing the strength of that hurricane. And with that, then something radiant starts coming out of our heart. Some wish for that other person to be happy. So we take on more and more of their suffering. It reduces the strength more and more of our own pain and self-cherishing, puts us more and more in contact with our own love and radiance, And that we give out. Right? The taking is taking on the suffering and putting it onto our own. The giving is giving out our own wishes for happiness. You know, so then we address, mentally we address that other person who had the suffering similar to ourself, and we say, may you know comfort, may you feel safe, may you know, we give out light in whatever form. May the winds of your hurricane be calmed, like that. So as we do the practice, we can combine it with our breath if we want. We don't have to, but it's very powerful to combine it with our breath. So as we breathe in, it's like we're drawing away that destructive energy. We're combining it and combating the destructive energy in closing our own heart, opening our heart up, and then giving out light, which transforms into whatever the other person needs to be happy. So we're taking on darkness, using that darkness to, in a sense, obliterate our own darkness, and then give out light in whatever form the other person needs. And this, in the beginning, this is counterintuitive. You know, I'm in so much pain, why do I want to even draw any more pain near me? But if we recognize what we're doing, what we can do by this, we actually find some relief, some openness coming from this. And then it builds up a strength so that when that meditation is over for that time being, we're in a better position to deal with whatever our original problem was. You know, the betrayal or the hatred or the lies or whatever it was. You know, it hasn't solved all those problems. It hasn't whitewashed them away, but it's given us access to a deeper part of our own being. And we've done it by using the pain that we have, using it to take on the pain of others. So instead of feeling in this tight cocoon of I, me, mine, we're opening our heart more universally. That's not an instant shortcut, right? But it is a very powerful, effective way of transforming our emotions. Not denying them, you know, we're taking their reality there. Not being unrealistic about it, thinking we can just wash away all problems with a simple visualization, but really building up this sense of connection with all beings, developing something more universal rather than this tight claustrophobic feeling of me and my terrible problem.
Wow.
It's kind of Jesus Day, right?
So,
Thank you.
oof.
Yes.
Oh,
Did you get
So folks, I very much appreciate your the patience you have with my long-winded explanations.
Thank you for the long-winded explanation.
Yes, we appreciate it. That was awesome. It was very interesting.
There is an author and teacher who I've not yet met personally, but who I have extraordinary respect for, named Pema Chodron.
Yes.
Her Dharma Center is in Nova Scotia, and she was a student in the Kargu tradition, or is a student in the Kargu tradition, but a great teacher in her own right, who's published many books and has many recordings out of her teachings. And every single one of the teachings of hers that I've heard or read, every single one contains, in one form or another, a Tonglen meditation. You know, no matter what the topic is, no matter what it starts with, it always goes to Tonglen. You know, taking suffering, giving happiness, and so there's a great variety of ways in which she presents it, and she has a very, very good sensitivity just to the human predicament. Very, very human teacher, you know. And so if this kind of approach is interesting, then a much more succinct but well presented explanation, or a series of explanations, can be found in a number of Dharma books by a number of great teachers, but among them, one of the ones I would recommend the most are the teachings of Pema Chodron.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, her husband wasn't good to her either. She had a terrible breakup with her husband before she became a monk.
Mm. Okay, so, so anyway, I've enjoyed the time to spend with you.
Wonderful, wonderful.
It's been lovely to have met you. I appreciate your patience and kindness and attentiveness. And if there has been any value in anything that's jumped out of my mouth, it's simply because I've had the good fortune of meeting His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Khyentse Zopa Rinpoche and Geshe Ngawang Dargay, all my other teachers, and most especially the beloved Lama Yeshe. So, whatever value we may have experienced here, may it go so that all teachers, such as the ones I've mentioned, who reveal paths leading to happiness, high rebirth, liberation, and full enlightenment, may be endowed with long and fruitful lifetimes, and may we come under the benevolent care of such compassionate spiritual teachers in this and in all our future states of existence. And in this way, may we complete our spiritual path as swiftly as possible in order to repay the infinite kindness we have received from others, and help others achieve the cessation of the suffering that all of us deeply desire, and the experience of fulfillment, which is our heart's deepest wish. Thank you, everybody.